Your neighbor is building a cruise ship in his driveway, in the desert, with no clouds in the sky. Is he insane, or is everyone else? Because what I'm about to show you from both the Bible and the Quran suggests that the majority can be dead wrong, and the person who looks crazy to the crowd might be the only sane one left. And here's the part that's going to mess with your head. Both scriptures say we're living in those exact same days right now. Right now, you probably think we're living in uniquely corrupt times. That the violence, the chaos, the moral breakdown you see on the news is something new. But both Christianity and Islam argue we've been here before. They both describe a moment in ancient history where the doomsday clock actually hit midnight. They present the story of Noah not as a fairy tale about animals walking 2 by 2, but as a forensic analysis of a civilization that crossed the point of no return. And once you see how both scriptures describe what happened and why it had to happen, you can't unsee the parallels to today. Let me show you what I mean. We often ask, if there is a God, why doesn't he stop the evil? Well, the story of the flood is the answer to that question. It's the moment where God did stop the evil, but both scriptures are very clear. This wasn't random divine rage. It was a calculated decision after centuries of warnings. Genesis 6:5 offers a chilling psychological diagnosis of the pre-flood world. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Notice the absolute language here. Only evil, all the time. This wasn't a society that had a few bad apples. It was a society where the moral compass had been demagnetized. The system was completely infected. The text argues that humanity had weaponized its own existence to the point where creation had become a burden to the Creator. Now watch this. The Quran paints an almost identical picture of societal stubbornness in Surah 71, 5-7. Here, Noah describes his exhaustion with a people who have shut down their cognitive faculties. My Lord, indeed I invited my people night and day. But whenever I invited them that you might forgive them, they put their fingers in their ears, covered themselves with their garments, persisted, and were arrogant with great arrogance. The imagery here is profound. Fingers in their ears, covered with garments. It describes a culture of willful blindness. They weren't just doing evil, they were actively blocking out any frequency that transmitted truth. They had insulated themselves from reality. When you synthesize these texts, you get something critical. There is a line in the sand. There is a terminal velocity to human corruption where a society becomes unsalvageable. The flood wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of sanitation. It was chemotherapy for a planet that had stage 4 cancer. For the modern person, watching the news and feeling hopeless, this is confronting. It forces us to look at our own world and ask, how close are we to that line? When does freedom become anarchy? But if the diagnosis, total corruption, is the same, the prescription is even more specific. God didn't just wipe the slate clean. He provided a very strange, very specific escape hatch. And as it turns out, both faiths agree that the Ark wasn't just a boat. It was a test of sanity. Imagine your neighbor starts building a cruise ship in his driveway. And imagine you live in Phoenix, Arizona, hundreds of miles from the ocean. You wouldn't think he was a visionary. You would think he was having a psychotic break. You would call the homeowners association or maybe a psychiatrist. We often view Noah as a hero, but we forget that to his contemporaries, he was the town fool. Genesis 6:14-16 gives Noah a blueprint that is staggering in its specificity. So make yourself an ark of cypress wood, make rooms in it and coat it with pitch inside and out. The text goes on to define the dimensions. 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide. That translates to roughly 510 feet long. To put that in perspective, that's bigger than a WWII heavy cruiser. It's a massive industrial undertaking. God was asking a man to build a floating city in the middle of nowhere, with no clouds in the sky, based entirely on a word he heard. It was a command that defied empirical evidence. Now watch the Quran zoom in on the social cost of this obedience in Surah 11:38. And he constructed the ship, and whenever an assembly of the eminent of his people passed by him, they ridiculed him. The Arabic implies a repetitive mocking. They didn't just laugh once, it was their daily entertainment. Hey Noah, looking for water. Hey Noah, gone crazy yet? Noah's response in the text is stoic and chillingly confident. If you ridicule us, then we will ridicule you just as you ridicule. He knew something they didn't. He knew the physics of the world were about to change. Here's a mind-blowing historical fact. In 1872, George Smith found the Epic of Gilgamesh, a pagan text describing a great flood. But that was just the beginning. Anthropologists have since identified over 270 distinct flood legends from civilizations all over the world, from the Aztecs to the Chinese to the Aboriginal Australians. The data is staggering. 88% of these stories involve a favored family being saved, 70% involve survival via a boat, 67% involve animals being saved. This suggests that the story of Noah isn't just a religious text. It's a cultural memory. It seems the human race carries a collective scar from a time when the water rose and didn't stop. So why does this matter? We live in a culture of consensus. We're terrified of being canceled or looking stupid. We determine what is true by looking at what the majority believes. But the story of Noah is the ultimate counterculture manifesto. It argues that the majority can be wrong, dead wrong. It suggests that sometimes sanity looks like madness to the crowd. Noah was the only person on earth who was preparing for the reality that was coming, while everyone else was preparing for a future that didn't exist. But this conviction came with a heartbreaking price. We have this sentimental idea that faith runs in the family. We assume that if a father is a prophet, a man who literally speaks to God, his children will automatically be saints. But both Christianity and Islam use the story of Noah to shatter this assumption. They both introduce a heartbreaking plot twist. You can save the world, but you can't always save your own house. Genesis 9:24-25 shows the dark aftermath of the flood. Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. They all physically board the ark, they all survive the water. But physical survival isn't the same as spiritual survival. Shortly after landing, Noah's son Ham commits a grave act of dishonor against his father. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." Even though Ham was on the boat, he wasn't with the program. He shared Noah's DNA, and he shared Noah's Ark, but he did not share Noah's heart. The Bible illustrates that proximity to a prophet does not guarantee your character. Now watch the Quran reveal a different, yet equally tragic dimension of this family fracture in Surah 11:42-43. In the Islamic narrative, the separation happens before the ship sails. As the waves are rising, Noah sees his son standing apart. He calls out with a father's desperation, "O my son, come aboard with us and be not with the disbelievers." The son's response is the ultimate rejection of divine aid. "I will take refuge on a mountain to protect me from the water." Noah pleads one last time, reminding him that there is no protector today except God. But the verse ends with a crushing finality, "And the waves came between them, and he was among the drowned." When you synthesize these two accounts, you get a powerful lesson in individual responsibility. The Bible shows us a son who was physically saved but spiritually lost, Ham. The Quran shows us a son who was physically lost because he refused to be saved. Both texts are screaming the same theological fact. Biology is not theology. You don't get into heaven because your dad is a pastor or your grandfather was an imam. You don't ride on someone else's ticket. Noah, the great captain of salvation, had to watch his own flesh and blood fail the test. It reminds us that faith is a choice, not an inheritance. But once the door is closed and the family is separated, the event begins. When we picture the flood, we usually imagine a really bad thunderstorm. Dark clouds, thunder, and maybe a leaky roof. We think of it as a meteorological event, just too much rain. But if you actually read the texts, rain is the least of your problems. Both Christianity and Islam describe the mechanics of the flood not as a storm, but as a total collapse of the planetary infrastructure. Genesis 7:11 gives a precise geological report. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on that day all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened. Pay attention to the sequence. The springs of the great deep burst first. The Hebrew phrase implies the subterranean oceans, the water table rupturing through the crust. It suggests earthquakes, tsunamis, and the breaking of tectonic plates. The Bible describes the flood as a pincer movement, water falling from above and water shooting from below. Now watch the Quran confirm this dual-direction assault in Surah 54:11-12. Then we opened the gates of the heaven with rain pouring down and caused the earth to burst with springs. But in Surah 11:40, the Quran adds a specific, terrifying detail about the start of the event. When the oven gushed forth, the word used is at-tanner, an oven or a kiln. This might sound metaphorical, but modern geology gives us a terrifying insight here. Geologists have discovered a transition zone in the Earth's mantle, roughly 410 to 660 km deep. It's estimated that this zone holds roughly 3 times the volume of all surface oceans combined, trapped in the rock structure. If that pressurized, superheated water were to be released, like an oven gushing forth, it would create a cataclysm exactly like the one described in these texts. The earth didn't just drown them, it scalded the civilization that had corrupted it. So why does this matter? We take the ground for granted. We build our skyscrapers and our highways assuming that the earth is a solid, passive foundation. But these stories offer a paradigm shift. They remind us that the planet is not a dead rock. It's a living stage, and it responds to the drama of its inhabitants. The text implies a frightening connection between moral chaos and physical chaos. When humanity lost its balance, nature lost its balance. The environment wasn't just a victim of the flood, it was the weapon of judgment. It frames the flood as a factory reset, a moment where the Creator held down the power button until the screen went black. But a factory reset isn't the end of the computer, it's a fresh start. After a catastrophe, the hardest part isn't surviving the event, it's living with the PTSD afterwards. Imagine being Noah. You just watched the entire world drown. You spent months floating over the corpses of a civilization. When you finally step off the boat onto dry land, every time a dark cloud forms in the sky, you would naturally panic. You would assume, here it comes again. But both Christianity and Islam agree that the story of the flood doesn't end with fear. It ends with a contract. Genesis 9:11-13 shows God establishing a universal covenant. I establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be destroyed by the waters of a flood. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and the earth. In the biblical narrative, the rainbow isn't just a refraction of light. It's rich with ancient military symbolism. In ancient Near Eastern iconography, a bow turned toward the earth signaled war. A bow turned away, unstrung and hanging in the clouds, signaled a cessation of hostilities. It represents a ceasefire. It's God promising that nature will remain stable, that the seasons will continue, and that humanity will be given a second chance to get it right. Now watch the Quran capture this moment of relief with a specific word in Surah 11:48. O Noah, disembark with peace from us and blessings upon you and upon nations descending from those with you. The word salam means peace, safety, and security. In a world that had been defined by chaos and drowning, God's first word to the new humanity is peace. So why does this matter today? We live in a world of constant low-grade anxiety. We worry about climate change, nuclear war, and economic collapse. We feel like the sky is falling. But these texts offer a paradigm shift. They argue that the world is held together not by luck, but by a promise. The rainbow and the Salem tell us that the universe is not trying to kill us. It implies that the sustainer is actively restraining the chaotic forces of nature to give us a platform to live on. Every time it rains and doesn't flood the world, it's a reminder that the treaty holds. So let's recap what we've uncovered. We have a tipping point where corruption becomes unsustainable, an impossible command that tests our sanity against the crowd, a family tragedy that proves salvation isn't genetic, a decreation event where the earth itself resets, and a peace treaty that guarantees our future. When you thread these 5 concepts together, the Ark stops being a nursery rhyme boat. It becomes a metaphor for survival in a chaotic age. We're living in a time that feels very much like the days of Noah. The noise is loud, the corruption is high, the ridicule is constant, but the story reminds us that you don't need a majority to be right. You just need to listen to the signal. Noah wasn't saved because he was a master shipbuilder. He was saved because when everyone else was arguing with the reality of the situation, he was preparing for it. He built an ark of principles when everyone else was drowning in the culture. The question the story leaves us with is simple. The rain is always falling somewhere. What are you building to keep your family afloat? If you enjoy digging into the source code of these ancient traditions and finding the wisdom that connects us, make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one.